Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 2, part 2 of Women's History Month, Women in Comics. Tonight we are doing Letters to the Editors, which is what I've decided to call it. We'll see if that works. But we have 3 fantastic editors on tap for us tonight. We're going to talk about all kinds of things related to their careers and related to their experiences in comics, and we can talk about cool comic stuff, hopefully. I don't want to take too long. I want to get into it. We're going to introduce our first guest, who I've interviewed before, and we've had a great time together. So our first guest is Heather Antos, and I'm just going to get a little bit here. She began her career at Marvel Comics and worked her way up through the editorial ranks. She has been a senior editor for Valiant Entertainment, now currently is at IDW. She's working with the Star Trek books, amongst other things. She co-created Gwenpool, the character from Marvel, and in her freelance editing work, she's done books like Redlands, Bitterroot, and others, and we're going to bring her in right now. Just hang on. Hi, Heather.
Hi.
Welcome back. I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always good chatting with you.
I don't want to take too long because I want to bring everybody in. But before we get to that, you need to tell everybody associated with Crashing how much I love that book. I tell everybody about it. It's one of the books that I am constantly telling people that they're missing it, that you need to read it. It is such a good book. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, no, thank you so much. It is one of my favorite projects I've worked on in my entire career. And I'm so glad it's finding its audience.
Right. And everyone who is paying attention, it is nominating season. Don't forget, don't sleep on Crashing. All right. So our next guest, alphabetically, is Shelly Bond. Shelly began her career at Comico and spent 15 or so years at DC and the Vertigo imprint. She served as executive editor for Vertigo. And then she ran and co-founded the Black Crown imprint at IDW. And her work curating stories through her off-register press that she's running right now is fantastic. There are some anthologies that if you haven't read, you need to get. And she's writing. She's currently has the critically acclaimed Filth and Grammar, the Comic Editor's Secret Handbook, which is out, also available for nominating season. And she's about to be publishing her second part of that graphic novel series. So without further ado, here is Shelly Bond. Hi, Shelly.
Hey, Bob. Thank you for such a greatest hits reel.
Well, I had to be careful when I do these things because I have to like I had to get Philip in there,
Yes.
and we have to make sure that everything fits right because I want you to like think about it like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one, or things that mean something to me too as well. So a lot of those are really important. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad to have you back.
Hey, me too.
And as I said, Filth and Grammar is something that everybody should read. Anyone who's thinking about doing anything in comics should get a lot from it. And absolutely everyone I talk to has said the same thing. And again, it is nominating season, and it is something that people should think about for the 2022 awards. I want to bring in our last guest, which is Diana Schutz. She is an award-winning editor who began her career in 1978. She's worked for Marvel and Comico as editors, and then she became senior executive editor at Dark Horse. At Dark Horse, she's done so many books: Sin City, 300, Grendel. She worked on Usagi Yojimbo, American Splendor, Bean World. She is currently an adjunct professor at Portland State University and both a published author as well. And what I love the best in her bio line is the first woman to be inducted in the Canadian Comic Book Creator Hall of Fame, which is very appropriate for this. And so let us bring in Diana Schutz. Hello, Diana.
Hi, Bob. That was I'd forgotten about some of those.
See, it worked.
Yeah.
I didn't. I almost put in Star Blazers, but I didn't, because Star Blazers means a lot to me. But I don't know if anybody else would have gotten it. But
that's definitely going back.
And the creator
decades.
list. If anybody's watching, go find the creator list on that Johnny Quest book. Oh my gosh, that is quite a who's who.
Yeah, it was a real juggling act. Those first 13 issues, and I know Shelly and Heather will definitely appreciate this. The plan was this wasn't a kind of last minute resort thing. Our plan was to change artists every single issue for a monthly book for the first year. And we did it. But yeah, not easy.
No. I want to I have like this list over here that you can't see, but it's like this list of just like books that I want to talk about with all of you, and so many different things. You guys are just so amazing, and some of the things you've created and brought to people's minds and eyes and ears, and it's just wonderful, and I appreciate everything that you've done. But I'm going to ask you some questions kind of just to start the conversation, but please feel free to ask each other as well. I want to say one of the things I want that we've kind of done as we talk to people is what excites you about the industry. And I know you're all excited about this industry as much as comics will break your heart if you let it. It's something that we all love, and we're here. What is it about comics that excites you to be in it? Anybody can go. You guys, go ahead. Go ahead, Shelly. You have something to say.
Oh, great. I always have. Did you say I always have something to say?
No, I know. I can see it in your face. I can see it in your face.
I was gonna actually ask Diana to go first. I feel like I've been so loquacious whenever I've been on these live podcasts, and I'm actually really excited to hear what Diana and Heather have to say. I'd like to be last, if that's all right.
Okay, that's fine. So Diana, what brought you into comics? What is it that made you want to be in this industry? Because people don't stay in this industry if they don't want to.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to go back to your first question, Bob, about the appeal of comics, if I got that right.
Yeah.
Because way too many things brought me into comics.
Okay.
But I guess the sort of enduring appeal for me of comics is the incredible means of communication that it represents. Comics can tell any kind of story, and I guess the conjunction of word and picture and how those two can blend, can move apart, come together in so many different ways to convey meaning. And that's a kind of theoretical thing, but anyway, that's been intensely appealing to me all along, to see how words and pictures work together.
How about you, Heather? What is appealing about comics?
Yeah, from just like the creator fan side, my mom would always say I drew comics before I knew what comics were. Since I was a little kid and could hold a crayon in my hand, I was telling stories through the characters that I was creating, and I think that's one of the as cheesy as it is, right? Your special effects budget in comics is the span of your imagination. And truly anything you can think of and create and tell that story on paper. And there's something that is just so incredibly empowering about that. And then just on the editorial side, one of the things that continues to drive me and just excite me every single day is you can work on a book with the same writer and the same artist one day, and then the next day work on an entirely different book with them, and it's a completely different experience. And there's a real special alchemy about putting a creative team together or coming up with a concept and hoping we threw all those ingredients in a pot and what comes out is gold. It doesn't always work, but through experience, hopefully it does. And there's just something so kinetic about that is really really special.
Great. How about you? Okay, so Shelly, what is it that excites you about comics?
Honestly, everything Diana and Heather said, I'm nodding, I'm agreeing with. But if I had to narrow it down to three things for me, it's the urgency of comics, not unlike music. I think real art does one very important thing, at least for me, and it makes me feel alive. And I think the fact that in comics, we can make art quickly. Unlike any other industry, film, TV, even making a record, there's nothing stopping you from making a comic in an hour from now. You can make a zine. You can bring friends together. You can put an entire 272-page comics compendium together in 3 months during a global pandemic, which is what I did with a bunch of editors and creators, which was called Insider Art. But the urgency of getting a concept out that maybe nobody knows about or nobody cares about. So that's one thing. The second thing is art directing, because I'm inspired by art and design, and the sequential storytelling aspect of editing has been overlooked forever and ever. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write film and grammar, because you do need a strong visual acuity. You cannot just be a wordsmith or a great proofreader. That's part of the job, but you also need to know your stuff when it comes to pacing and rhythm and anatomy. Final thing, comics to me have such a wonderful participatory nature. So as editors, our job is to make everyone who contributes to the comic look as great as possible on the page. And that includes, what do we leave behind for the reader to join in and sort of become a creator, become a participant in that experience. So the answer, Bob, is everything, but especially those three things. The best time to make comics is now.
I agree. I think that's cool. I want to take just a second, and I know we're going to have a lot of time to get into something, but before I forget, Heather, I kind of want to pull on you, and Diana, I don't know if you can contribute to this, but it's Women's History Month, and that's part of why we're doing this. And someone who's no longer with us, who was an important woman in comics, is Flo Steinberg. And I'd like for you to talk about your experience with her and remember her a little bit.
I knew Flo just a few short years. I had started Marvel in 2015, and at that time, I mean, she's literally was with the Marvel since its inception, working with Stan in the bullpen, and but she at this point in time would be a part-time proofreader. She would come in a couple days a week and help out with copy editing and really just give editors a bunch of shit, cheer us on. And but she really took the young female editorial staff under her wing, and was there to pep talk us and cheer us up. And one of her big things was always on Fridays when pages are coming in late or you're missing things and everything's on fire and everything has to go to print, and oh my god, I'm going to be at the office until 1 a.m. and everything's stress. She was always the person who was like, guys, it's just comics, like chill out, like it's not the end of the world. And she was really a tough cookie that was a great spirit and reminded us like why we're all here, and we're here because we love comics. And we love these characters, and just don't take any shit from any of the boys.
Diana, did you know you worked at Marvel? Not. You didn't know her?
I worked at Marvel for 4 days.
Okay,
and
it was very short.
Yeah, and quit in utter terror of my indoctrination lecture with Jim Shooter. Shooter was editor-in-chief in those years, and it was standard for every new employee to sit down with him and kind of be schooled in the Jim Shooter theory of how comics work and what editors' jobs are. And I wasn't ready for that. So I was good for 4 days, and
and you did not agree.
Well, I didn't go in for my indoctrination lecture.
Okay.
I quit that morning.
Okay. Well, I will say that independent comics is better for it. So, and the work that you like it. I think in the conversations that I have with people, I think Comico doesn't get remembered as much as it should. And we have obviously 2 veterans of Comico, but like the stable of properties that you guys had, and the things that and the people who you then brought in. I mean, Bill and Matt, who did work with you guys, and where they went, amazing stuff that's often not remembered well enough. I'll say that.
Well, I'll just add that Bill Willingham and Matt Wagner were both there when I was hired on, which was just a few months after leaving Marvel. I was a young girl at the time, and Marvel Comics was supposed to be my pie in the sky, my big dream. But really, when I walked in, it was a Midtown Manhattan corporation, and I was too young and too shell-shocked to deal with that. So, but that's not to say I didn't learn an awful lot in my 4 days there. I sure did. And one woman who was tremendously influential was Virginia Romita, John Sr.'s wife, and she was the then production manager at Marvel, if I have that correctly. In any case, she made the individual book production schedules, and from her, I learned how to make individual book production schedules, as well as eventually a master printing schedule, both of which I brought to Comico and then later to Dark Horse. So those 4 days were beneficial in many ways.
I agree. Thank you.
And I think if you would have stayed at Marvel, Diana, who knows if I'd even be in comics today, because for those people who are watching who don't know, I am here because of her.
Well,
she gave me my first job in comics.
I did.
I will never forget it. She did not have to take a chance on a goth girl with gigantic Robert Smith hair and silver lipstick right out of college. with Doc Marten boots. I was 22 and I looked 11, and I'm still to this day surprised.
You still look 11.
Still have the black tips, but yeah, I'm a little older now.
No, that's important. That's great.
Well, Shelly walked in the door and was an ace proofreader right from the start, and that was I was immediately sold. So it was an easy decision to make.
And it's one of the funny things about comics and everyone you speak to in the industry, how everybody has their own. Nobody has the same story. Everybody's way of getting in. Everybody has somebody else to thank. Everybody has somebody else to thank. Like Heather, you started working at Marvel pretty quickly, but you've moved all around and done, like, for someone, and for someone with the length of your career, what you've accomplished is amazing and wonderful. So we have.
Thank you.
One of the other things I kind of wanted to talk about was there's all of you have, and Heather, you kind of mentioned it earlier, is you all have collaboration experience with you've collaborated with the same person multiple times on multiple different projects. How does that work for you? How is a project that you're going to do with Peter Milligan on this different from the next Peter Milligan project, or Cullen Bunn here and Cullen Bunn over there, or even just artists? How do you guys approach that? And Diana, I mean, you've worked with Frank Miller on a bunch of different things. You've worked with Matt Wagner on a bunch of different things, and other people as well. How do the projects come to you? Is it something that they bring to you, or do you go ask for them? And do you take in mind what you've done before?
I guess because I've spent my career largely working on creator-owned projects, Johnny Quest notwithstanding.
Don't forget Star Blazers.
Right. Creators came to me, by and large, creators came to me with their projects. And in terms of, how they differ from project to project, that's an interesting question. And I only have some half-formed thoughts about that, but I guess, a huge difference would be Frank working on Sin City versus doing 300. But the dynamic between myself and Frank remained the same, I guess. He simply, he was full of stories at every moment. And for the longest time, his stories revolved around noir and crime and a big guy with a lot of Band-Aids on his face. And then suddenly one day in a bar in San Diego at 2 p.m, he said, I want to do a comic. I want to do historical fiction. And I thought, are you out of your mind? But, again, the dynamic between us remained the same. His way of working remained the same. He simply shifted gears into a different space for telling a different kind of story, and which meant, of course, as editor, I would have to shift gears as well. One thing that I did as we embarked on 300 was I began reading some of the texts that Frank was reading. So, some of the historical research that had been done. So, yeah, I mean, you go where your creators take you when you're working with creator-owned projects.
And I want to come back to that with the other ladies, but that's an interesting point you bring up, in that when you're when someone comes to you or presents you with a creator-owned story, how often is it that you have to go do research? How to be able to, guide or edit the story portion of it, not the piece by piece, but like know that it's going in the right direction and that you're not going to get called out once it comes into press.
Well, yeah, if you're doing anything historical, then clearly that's important. But I think Heather and Shelly will agree that every project probably involves some research, some amount of research, even if it's just familiarizing yourself with characters and storylines that have come before, or with the creator's work that has come before. You may not have read everything they've done, and it's kind of up to you to have a knowledge of that, of the creator and where they're coming from.
So Heather, that involves a lot of watching Star Trek, right?
Well, these days, yes. A lot of watching Star Trek, and a lot of well, I mean, it's a 60-year-long show, so there's
Sure.
a lot of Star Trek, and a lot of it contradicts each other, which always makes it fun, much like comics. So
Right. Sure. But like something like, for example, when Redlands was presented to you, and I know you were very excited to do that, you didn't grow up in the swamps of Florida, no. And like, is there something that, you make sure that, things, or even in a story, like if someone presents something like, okay, well, this is what happens, and I know this is going to happen in this fashion. And do you, as an editor, need to say, yeah, I need to make sure that that's right, so the reader doesn't say, oh, you're wrong about this, and then blow it out of the water?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a certain level of that. Like Diana was saying, when you're doing something that is historically based, there's definitely a lot more knowledge and research that has to go into just the factual landscape of which a story is taking place. A lot of what I work on tends to be fantasy, science fiction, supernatural. So we have a lot more leeway in what we can get away with. For something like Redlands, for instance, because you brought it up, I didn't necessarily have to rely on any personal experience growing up in deep South Florida, because literally the writer did, and that was her experience, and she was telling, this was her story of the world and land and towns that she grew up in. I trust her to know that better than I ever could. But when it came to the lore of the supernatural elements that we had of the witches, Jordy and I did set some ground rules, and I asked her, like, is there a specific or particular type of occult lore that you're inspired by for this story, so we can make sure that we're being, respectful where we need to be, or what have you. And I worked on Shadow Man, which deals a lot with the voodoo mythology and lore. And there's definitely some leeways the original Valiant creators took back in the 90s, but that's one of the areas that we wanted to be more respectful in the present, to make sure we're not appropriating the voodoo culture just for the sake of it. Would be cool for a comic, right? That is something that as editors we should definitely be mindful of when we're dealing with other cultures in our comics.
How about you, Shelly? What's your take on that?
Well, I want to actually rewind back to a name that you dropped that I'm very familiar with, which is Peter Milligan.
Right.
You had mentioned, we're talking
exactly.
about people that we've worked with many times in our career. And, to go back to what Diana said, there were times when Peter Milligan would bring an idea to me, which was great. But more often than not, I wouldn't approve an idea cold, because I always felt like I wanted to challenge him. I started working on Shade with issue 34. So he had written 37 scripts before I actually moved to New York. So I was mostly interested in what we could do that was different, and he had already written so many scripts. So I think one of the things he liked about me and loathed about me, by the way, because I know he thinks I'm a pain in the butt as an editor, but I'd like to think that I had the balls to push him out of his comfort zone, because I think writers that have been writing monthly books for years and years and years don't even realize they cover the same themes sometimes, they write the same stories, and they ask for the same artists. So I have always gone out of my way to tap him on the shoulder or punch him in the head. And he's thanked me sometimes. So in our later experiences together, like Kid Lobotomy, for instance, I happened to come up with an idea, and I reached out to him, not even realizing what time of day it was. And it was Valentine's Day 2016. And I sent him an email, and it started with, "Hey, Lobotomy." And it went on from there, and it became the debut book for Black Crown. So I think when you find a writer or an artist or creative person that you really connect with, I think the beauty of working with them over time is to see how you both can evolve and push the medium together. So I brought Tess Fowler in to work with Peter Milligan because he hadn't worked with too many female artists. And I thought that was wrong. And that challenged his way of approaching that particular monthly series. And it was an incredible experience for the entire team because, it turned everything on its head, including the comic book sometimes, because we turned the comic different ways.
Yes.
Peter is known for his postmodernist sensibilities. Well, I think they were even challenged to the 11th power with that book, because I wanted it to be that way.
I think also that speaks to, the fact that Peter was willing to step up to the plate speaks a lot to him and the relationship you've built with him, and the respect he had for you. I'm sure all of us in this room can speak to a time where we have given creators a note that we will not, stand back on, and certain creators, after doing the job a certain way for a long time, do not want to change, do not want to grow. It was good enough for the last 10 years, so it's going to continue to be good enough,
Right.
It speaks a lot about the collaborative relationship and respect and trust, really, that you're able to build with the talent that you're working with over a time. For instance, there's a writer that I've been working with for the majority of my career that at one point, there was one moment in an interview that we just couldn't agree on. And it was something that ethically, morally, I could not stand by having on in the script. And they just couldn't, they didn't see what the big deal was. And at a certain point, I had to say, this is your story at the end of the day. If this is your gut instinct, I fully support you 100%. This is your book. I just can't have my name on it. That's not something that I am comfortable with. And because I said that was the moment that made this creator realize, oh, this is a big deal. I trust your judgment as my editor, as my friend, that this might not be the best direction. And because we had that trust, we were able to move forward and even find, I think honestly, a much stronger scene in the end.
Yeah. And I've been in situations like that as well. And, honestly, sometimes it really is better to part ways if you cannot get over that one truly profound word choice, way of handling sex and violence, something that's gratuitous that perhaps the writer just isn't seeing with multiple views on that scene. To me, I try to think of it as professionally as possible. and I would recuse myself from the project, just like you said,
Hmm.
and probably not work with that person again. And that's okay. And
Yep.
if someone else chooses to, that's okay too. But
Yep.
you have to stand your ground. I think happy compromises are all what we're used to as editors, and it is collaborative. So, you know, I've been called a bully editor. I've called myself a bully editor, but I do it in jest. I think the truth of the matter is we all weigh in. We are all part of the team, and we are the ones to make that final decision. So when there's a tussle that's really gone too far, I think it's perfectly acceptable to recuse yourself, or perhaps, you know, like you did, you were able to get your writer to understand your point of view and how serious it was. So props to you for getting to that point, and your writer.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm just going to step in
Good. Do it.
because
This is what I wanted.
I'm remembering. I also want to say that there comes a time too when you, as editor, have to step back. Though, Shelly, I take your point that happy compromises are what we're used to. But you know, for example. And I'm sorry, Shel, because I know you've heard this before, but I learned a very important lesson in my first year editing, and it was working with Matt Wagner, and we had a huge discussion, shall I say, about a script, a Grendel script that he'd written. I never, you know, again, this was the middle 80s, and we were very, very conscientious of the fact that we were an independent publishing house, and we were there to serve the creators, serve the books, yes, but creators had been treated horribly since the start throughout the history of comics, and the independents were there to make a change. And so it was important for us to give the creators their due in a way they had not ever received before from the industry. So with every Grendel script that Matt wrote, he and I would get on the phone and have a marathon conversation about what I thought needed amending. And one day we argued over one single word for, my God, about 20 minutes. And back and forth, and I was trotting out dictionary definitions and telling him there's just no way this is coming across the way you want it. And finally, at the end of this lengthy back and forth, Matt just said, "Di, it's my book." End of argument. You know, step back. At that point, really, you step back. I guess what I'm trying to say here too is that there also comes a point where maybe just like Flo Steinberg, Heather, you know, yeah, you have to remember, hey, this is comics,
Yep.
and we're going to live another day, I guess.
Yeah.
And just how important is this thing that we're arguing about anyway?
Well, yeah, no, for sure. I think it's important to keep in mind, you know, none of us here on this call are the editors who are going to argue semantics, right? Or realize we're arguing semantics at a certain point and be like, you know what, it's whatever. It's the end of the day. I think the times where we do draw that line in the sand is when, you know, I'm not just looking out for the book, but I'm looking out for the creative team that I'm working with too. And if there is some scene, some word, some phrase, some moment that can be taken out of context and really be detrimental to that creator's career or the book's success, like that is when we draw that line in the sand.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. And I think, Diana, just to your point, as someone who's worked with Matt, though not nearly as much as you have, I think I will say that Matt's work on Grendel is just extraordinary to me. I've been rereading my favorite of the storylines, which just came out in this omnibus, by the way. So I'm going to give some props to the whole team here.
Look at that product placement.
I know, it's right there.
But I gotta tell you guys, so the Epi Thatcher storyline was my favorite. It was the one that was going on when I was working as the editorial assistant at Kamiko, and I was allowed to answer the phones. And when Matt Wagner called, he had a very distinctive
I was
voice.
allowed to answer the phones.
I would say Kamiko, and someone would say, "Hey, Shell, it's Matt." I mean, time would stop. I would be sweating. My knees were knocking. I would honestly need smelling salts because I just thought he was the coolest person on earth. He liked the same music I liked. He was, I think, and is one of the finest writers and finest graphic designers and draftsmen of our time. But the point I wanted to make is not to admit that Matt Wagner was my first crush in comics, although he was. I wanted to say, Diana, that one thing that Matt had said to me when I was editing a script with him, because something was kicked back from our proofreader. And I didn't feel as passionate about it as our proofreader, but at DC. But we talked about how Burroughs and Bowie were very liberal when it came to creating their own language. And so in Matt's defense, I agreed that in this particular case, he had a point. And so I let it ride. And I still would do that today. And it wasn't anything that I felt was immoral or unethical, but it was definitely something that was kicked back to me from our proofreader, who was, much more of a pedant than I was. And it's just, it's you hate to say things are case by case, but they truly are in so many situations. But Matt, just chef's kiss. He's the ultimate chef. And I think his writing on Grendel just was so sophisticated and ahead of its time. And to this day, by the way, still available as an omnibus, out now, is the future. Not unlike The Clash's Sandinista, which came out in 1980, and Matt is also a Clash fan. That's all I'm going to say about
That's perfect. I'm gonna take a second because I haven't had this opportunity, and this is the first time I'm talking to Diana. I wanted to, since we're talking about Matt, I loved the most recent Mage storyline, and I really appreciated that. And I thought that what he did there was such a growth experience. It just felt so mature and so much that it felt so perfectly nested into the entire storyline. Like, it's like, okay, we're grown up now, and all I care about is my kids. It was just this really Papa Bear type of thing, and I'm too old for this bullshit type of thing. And it was, I loved every bit of it.
And I mean, there's a reason that it took that long to be published. I'm not sure if like Dave Sim, Matt had right from the start conceived of Mage, I should say, as a trilogy, but somewhere along the way with those first 15 issues, he certainly did, and was bugged constantly by fans after the first part of that trilogy was published in the mid 80s to, when are we going to see Mage 2? And then when Mage 2 was published in the mid or later 90s, when are we going to see Mage 3? And really, Matt had to grow. He had to grow as a human, basically, to get to that point and to know where the story was going to take him, because it's autobiographical. It's entirely autobiographical, although also allegorical.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, by the time we get to that third part, you see Matt as he absolutely is, and your designation of Papa Bear is right on the money. He is a great father.
what the little interaction I've had with him, I know that as well as Brendan. I've had some communication with him, but for me, reading that book was, being a father of children and where I am. And I know I'm the audience. I know I am, but he hit his audience. I'll tell you that much. So
he's quite something, and I was really, I was very lucky actually to work on that, because had I still been on staff at Dark Horse, I would not have been able to work with Matt. I think again the credit there was consulting editor, but
yes,
probably more accurately, it should have just been script editor, because that's what I did on that series.
So I want to, I kind of want to talk about stuff like that a little bit, because you've all worked for big enough companies besides just creator own stuff. Someone was invited tonight and they couldn't. They were told, and I'm not gonna say who or what company, but someone was invited and they wanted to join us tonight, but they were told by their company that they didn't want them to be doing something where it would be out in front face as an editor. Have you guys ever had anything where, not necessarily that, but like where you've had to deal with the company that you work for, restricting your communications in the world or the things you do because you're representing that company? And how does that work?
I mean, I'll jump in and be. I've definitely worked for companies in the past that would have preferred I not have the social profile that I do, or do.
You have the best social profile.
Well, thank you. I think so too. But
what are Diana and I?
Listen, I
not enough penguin
like
content,
and favor.
Shelly.
I like
not enough
and favorite
content.
between Off Register and Shelly Bond, X Bond. This is the most thing that I see all day, and I love it. Thank you. And it's just full of content. And listen, whoever is not following, I'm gonna. You brought this on yourself, Shelly, so you get.
I know.
Whoever is not following Shelly Bond, you need to, because this month she is doing this amazing day by day what goes into the life of being an editor and creating comics, and it is must read material. So go find it. It's on Instagram and her Twitter as well.
Penguins, but no, I'm allergic.
No penguins.
To penguins. And if you like Star Trek, Heather Antos is your person.
I'll send you a penguin that you can post, Shelly.
I'm allergic to penguins. I cannot post.
But anyway, as I was saying, like I have worked for companies that you have listed in my repertoire that would have rather preferred I not be as, I guess, public as I am. And I did it anyway and didn't care. Like that's, I'm here to represent my creators and my books, and I don't know. There's some, every company is different. Every company has different philosophies. Of course, I would never, go on a show and here's all the upcoming spoilers and here's all the dirt that's, to ruin the company's secrets. Like, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to do that. But, one of the very cool things that the comics industry has that many other industries do not have is the access to the people behind the scenes. And, people are never going to be able to understand, appreciate, or learn what a comic book editor does, what a production designer does, what a sales, associate, marketing associate for comics publisher does, unless we get out there and talk to people about it. And, and I think honestly, I think it's a real shame if a company is not going to allow their staff to speak about their experiences and history and roles, because how else do we garner interest and support from the community unless we let them know we exist?
Right. And how do we groom the next generation? Because I'm still convinced there's very little teaching, especially of the craft of editing, any longer in a lot of the companies. I have no proof because I've been working from my home for the past 4 years and I've rarely left the premises. You can tell I don't go out sunbathing quite often or often enough. But seriously, I make that statement based on walking into a comic book shop every couple of months and looking through comics. And I think it's sad. And it's one of the reasons why. Oh, I didn't know this was here. Thanks for handing it. One of the reasons why I created this was because the best time to make comics is now with crowdfunding.
And can I also just mention, please, Shelley, that Filth and Grammar is in fact the only text published on the work that we do on editing comics. The only. How long have we had How to Write Comics the Marvel Way, How to Write Comics, How to Write Batman comics, whatever. There are multiple texts out there for every aspect of comics making, except editing, until Filth and Grammar, until Shelley wrote and published Filth and Grammar last year.
Well, let me just add that Diana taught me many things that I've incorporated into my daily routine. As Bob mentioned, I am doing a hashtag daily routine on Instagram at SX Bond Imprimatur. I'm a shameless self-promoter, Sally. But Diana mentioned learning a lot in 4 days at Marvel. Well, I learned a lot because when Diana hired me, she was working out of a bedroom in a dilapidated duplex because Kamiko was on one side of the house and Dennis Lasorda, Phil Lasorda's brother's physical therapy office was on the other side. Diana would have me sit down next to her at her desk and I would look over her shoulder. And that's how she taught me how to do balloon comics. She would have a dictionary next to her because at that time we had to look up words in the dictionary for word breaks or for definitions. And I learned because she took the time to teach me. And she also put it into my head how to work out and project schedules, not just for this current issue, but for 18 months out. Mm-hmm. And why it was important to keep multiple copies of the scripts you have, one in the office and one if you take it home with you on the train, because you never know what's going to happen on that train. And Diana, I've talked to you about that before, but you really worked that into my head. And again, it was my first job out of college. What you said was gospel to me. And I took many of those strategies and many of those tips, continue to use them because they work. And a lot of them sound like basic common sense because they work. They're systems that work because they're maintained. And that's the whole part of it, whether you like to use digital calendar, whether you like to use a red pen or a Sharpie, whether you walk around with a clipboard like some people with a calendar on the back of it, that's up to you. It's the maintenance of your system to check and double check your work and to move it forward. That's the ticket. So I have to give you props, and I do thank you in Filth and Grammar. And there's a story about you in Fast Times, as you know.
The truth is, Bob, I was a horrible boss. Shelley's being really kind. It took me many years how to learn how to really appreciate the people that I brought into the industry, and to appreciate the work that they were doing for me and for the books. So Shelley, thank you for your kindness, but yeah, I could be really miserable, and it's a hard thing to sort of admit about yourself and to realize about yourself. And I take some solace from the fact that I did. As I got older, I became much better to the people that I worked with.
Well, in fairness, I think the editor's job is not for the faint-hearted. I think the comic book editor is so often compared to the paper pusher, the traffic cop, the coordinator, the submissions pile reader. A true comic book editor really has to be discerning and sharp as a tack at all times. And to do the job well, you really have to be able to not only manage like a lot of like plates and fire batons, but you have to people manage too. And so I feel like I try to explain this to people. It's not an entry level job, and neither is assistant editor. So for me to come in as an editorial assistant, I think what you probably didn't realize is that I was so happy to be there, and I was learning from everyone. I was just like this kid who had this wonderful opportunity. You know, Matt Wagner's Grendel 16 and 17 got me into comics. So a year later, I was working with Matt Wagner's editor at the company that published his work. And I was talking to Matt on the phone, even though I knew he didn't have a crush on me. That was big. So trust me when I tell you, I think that the editor's job is tough. And I was raised, you know, with some pretty thick skin. So as much as you wince when I sing your praises at times, look, I'm a realist. And, you know, I hate the phrase comics will break your heart. You know, toughen up, Buttercup. Like,
well, if you let it, that's the piece everybody misses.
Right? Editing comics, you have to be fierce. If you are not ready to hire and fire,
that's true,
at the drop of a hat, don't join us.
Yeah,
read the comics. We love you. You can share our interests. We are making the comics for you and for us and for our creators. So join us. But if you want to be a part of this club, you have to be Teflon. So trust me, Diana, I wouldn't have gotten this far, and I wouldn't have been a lifer if I couldn't take it. So believe me when I tell you, it's fair advice to people that want to get in. You have to know you're not going to be rich. You might not make a lot of friends, but you are going to be putting your name on exceptional work and hopefully igniting a comics revolution, which I think you did. And I kind of think that the rest of us did here too.
I think we all did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so too. I kind of want to let you all know that the reason I want you to be here is because you are not paper pushers. You are not people who are just traffic cops. There's something that you guys all bring to the medium that elevates it. And I appreciate you all doing that. I want to kind of turn the conversation. I would like you guys to have a conversation. It's something that I've talked about with kind of you guys before differently, but can we talk about covers? Can we talk about that thing that you walk into a comic shop or in the old days, a newsstand, and you see a cover in front of you and it makes you buy it? It's very, very rare anymore that I will buy a book because I see a cover, but many people, they're like, oh, I don't know what to get. I have enough. Maybe I'll get one more. I'll get this one. It looks good. What is the process as an editor, and how do you guys each do it differently, maybe, or the same, that you decide what a cover for a book is going to be? You want to start, Heather?
Gosh. I mean, it depends. What are we talking? Are we talking, you know, the 1 in 100?
No, just the A. I only care about A covers because I'm not
just
buying
the main
1
cover.
in 100.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean the when I literally did 100 variants for one issue.
Oh,
and
yeah, that's terrible.
And nearly died.
Glad you didn't. We're glad you didn't. We need you in comics.
Yeah, I mean, so there is for those at home who don't fully understand the comic book process, especially if you're working in direct market, traditional big 2 publishing or licensed publishing, 9 times out of 10, your cover is being done before the script is written. For better or worse, you know, like whether we would like that to be the case or not, I think it's safe to say, as for editors, we hate having to commission covers before knowing what's going to be inside the book. It makes it really rather hard, and that's why I think a lot of times with
Heather, who does your production schedules?
It's not always that. It's a lot of times. I mean, I never worked at DC, but I assume it's a similar workload to folks at Marvel, where you're overworked and understaffed, and
that's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and
are you talking about ongoing series?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ongoing series. I mean, the way I learned a lot when I was at Marvel, and I learned a lot of what not to do, especially when it came in terms to scheduling. And but unfortunately, that's just not how every editor works. That's not how every writer works. That's not how every creative team works. If you hear my train, I apologize. I live right next to a train. But yeah, I mean, like you said, the cover is there to get a reader to pick up the issue. It's to, hopefully in superhero publishing, a lot of times it's to look badass and ask a question, make the reader ask a question. That's always, a thing that I like to try and see out of my imagery is what does this make? Is this giving away the story, or is it just is it making me want to read it? Is it making me wonder what this is about, and there's a lot of different philosophies that go into it, but I think the key thing for me is a cover composition is entirely different than a splash page, than a pinup. And not every artist excels at all three. I do think it is extremely important to have your main covers be drawn by the interior artist when at all possible. Because if I'm picking up a book, I sure hope the outside looks like the inside and vice versa. But again, that's not always the case at every publisher. A general cover process is at least for me, is I have the script. If I don't have the script, I at least have an outline. I would go through the outline in the script, and I'd pick a couple key moments that I find that are interesting, that I think would make interesting shots. I would send that over to the artist. They would send over a couple compositions or sketches. I review that with my boss. If there's a licensor involved, they often review it. But usually when a licensor is involved, or even before I show it to my boss, if there's an image that I don't want them to approve, I just don't show it to them. Because if you show the people up above something that you don't want to get turned in the final, I guarantee you that's the one that they're going to love and pick.
And, that's hilarious, because that's also from the creative side. Matt Wagner, to go back to Matt, has said the same thing as well, that if he tries to submit only one sketch, because invariably if he's asked for more than one, it's always going to be the sketch he hates that the editor chooses.
I want to kind of take on what you said there, Heather, and kind of flip it to Shelly, because some of her books are known very specifically for having a different cover artist than the interior. And obviously they're not superhero books. And superhero books, I can see absolutely where that works. Where Heather was talking about, but like when you had James on Fables for a while, and you had a bunch of different you had a bunch of different other cover artists. How did you approach what was going to be on the cover, for example, for issues of Fables, where there's multiple different storylines running through? How did that process work for you on a regular monthly basis?
Well, for a monthly, first of all, it must be said that working with Bill Willingham on Fables was an incredible experience that no one saw coming, especially Diana. So if I can just share some background knowledge, when Diana and Bob Schreck left Comico, I believe it was 89, maybe late 1989. I was asked if I wanted to become the editorial department. And Rick Taylor, who was the art department essentially, was also asked if he could stay on. And the two of us were basically the only in-house staff. And Diana you were still working for the company, but you were freelance.
Freelance, yeah.
And so I was sort of the managing editor. You were the editor of your books, but I was just facilitating and helping you with some of the in-house work. My number one responsibility was finding Bill Willingham, because he was somewhere in the US in a van and he did not want to be found. And so I was fortunate enough to somehow wrangle him into writing a few more issues of The Elementals, which was one of the more popular Kamiko titles before Kamiko declared chapter 11 and then chapter 7. And I swear it was not my fault, Bob. You're looking at me like,
it wasn't.
what did
Listen,
Shelly do?
wrangling Bill is a full-time job.
It was. The one thing that I have to say is that when I was first working at Kamiko, I was super into Matt Wagner, which I don't know if you know that about me yet. For any of the
I've not heard that.
Super big Grendel fan, but didn't like superheroes at all until I read The Elementals. And I, to this day, think Bill was ahead of his time and think that his very sarcastic take on these superhero characters and just even the hell he put them through.
Well, just the concept that their creation is their death. I mean,
correct.
I mean, it starts out bad. It gets worse from there.
I think he changed the game. And to go back to Heather for a minute, I will say that I loved when Bill did his own cover art. I think some of his drawing on those wraparound covers for The Elementals were terrific. So I always knew that I would look him up one day, but I wasn't sure if he was going to be interested in talking to me, because he still thought, I was this pesky kid that somehow found a way to get a couple of issues of script out of him. So many, many years later, when I was at DC Comics and I worked my way up the ranks from assistant to associate, I was able to get him to pitch a series to DC Comics, and that was Fables. So to segue back to the cover, I met James Jean at one of the School of Visual Arts senior portfolio reviews. It was called Fresh Meat, and I would go every year and I would meet the most extraordinary artists. And that particular year, there were 3 artists that really blew my mind, and I hired them all to work on books for me. And James happened to be perfectly suited for Fables, and I was super lucky that Karen, my boss, Karen Berger, agreed. Mark Chiarello, we all saw like extraordinary talent in him just from his portfolio from art school. And James was the nicest, most professional artist from the moment I talked to him at that portfolio review. He was smart. He followed up with me when I asked him to. He came in to bring his portfolio to DC Comics. Everything about him, to the day he stopped working at DC Comics, was top notch. So I will tell you, it was a great experience. It was many, many years he worked on Fables. And it was just a blast. He lived in New York, so he would come up to the office. I would give him, if I didn't have a full script, which in the early days I had quite a few full scripts, because I wanted to make sure we had a few in the drawer, because we were serious about Fables.
And you had experience of working with Bill, shall I say, and so it was always important to have scripts in the drawer.
Absolutely. But even though, Fables was one of the longest running creator-owned titles at DC Comics, and even during a few years in there, it's 15 years, so maybe there were a couple of hiccups along the way, I already had contingency plans in place, knowing that things could go belly up at all times. And that's one of the superpowers of being a great editor. You got to always have a plan B and a plan C up your sleeve, because then it's no surprises.
I was going to say, I always say you need to see the gasoline trail before the spark lights, right? Like,
it's so true. The number one skill for an exemplary editor is triage. You have to really be able to stop, figure out what's broken and what's the worst injury of all your books. You need to be able to delegate so that you can get as much done as possible in a finite amount of time, and then pivot and do it in a way where you're still pleasant enough to work with. Because there are a lot of people in comics over the years who shall remain nameless, and none of them are women, by the way. But there were a lot of people that I watched crash and burn because they were rude and they were just nasty, horrible people. And they would be dictators when it came to editing their fiefdom and their books. So like Heather, I learned a lot at DC Comics how not to act emotionally in public, how not to treat someone, even if they're treating me badly, how not to treat them in return. And I think it's just because I was raised in a family business. And, you know, you're not a diva when your father tells you to sort dirty hotel laundry at the dry cleaning plant or press a pair of pants when you really wanted to just take a tap dancing class. So you kind of learn how you have to survive, especially in a male dominated field, and you learn how to work well with others. So back to the covers. James, brilliant. My approach is always to give the artist the script and then have a discussion. I might, like Heather, I might point out a few key areas, but what I always tell cover artists from the moment I hire them is this: I want 3 sketches. I will only accept 3 sketches, even if you're Matt Wagner. Well, okay, even if you're Matt Wagner. But seriously, I want 3 sketches because you should always respect the brief. So the writer might have a specific cover in mind. So that's the brief. Bill Willingham really wants to see Rose Red with a sword in her armor on this cover. So if you want to put her on the moon and make it relevant to the story, let's see the sketch. So 1 sketch is always the brief. 1 sketch might be something interesting that comes up in the conversation I have with the artist. And James would sometimes come in. So we would also, we liked the same music. We liked a lot of the same artists. We would talk about other things. We talk about the city and the urban environment. Fables was set in a secret society in New York City. So it was great. We were both there. So sometimes we would walk around. Second sketch could be something maybe we both came up with. Third sketch, dealer's choice. I would want him to bring me something completely discordant and weird, but I would want it to, without a doubt, have some graphic panache. And more often than not, I would get multiple covers out of those sketches, because sometimes they might not be right for one particular story. And sometimes they would inspire the writer, like Bill, for instance, to write a self-contained issue about what this cover could possibly mean, especially in terms of fairy tales and fables, which was the whole heart and soul of what Fables was. But my strategy is perhaps different from other people, and I really do believe in Milton Glazer's philosophy that you should never accept a sketch that just doesn't make you say, wow, because you can be convinced something is good or good enough, but I don't want my name on something like that. So I hope, with fingers crossed, that if I'm adding something to it, it's going to bring it up another notch or two. Because when I walk in a comic book store, I want someone to be mesmerized. And sometimes, like Heather said, it could be, you know, posing a question to the reader. Sometimes it could just be someone who is cool as all get out, that you just want to hang out with this character because this character looks like they're going to get into some good trouble. Sometimes it's just really powerful design that works on 3 different levels with the logo, and maybe create something that's just so different than you've ever seen before in modern comics. So honestly, it depends. And I think mood is another big indicator. You really want to connote the mood, and you want to create an atmosphere that someone could possibly escape to or be entertained by. Because I think at its best, comics do those 2 things very well. And that's what I really hope to connote from a cover.
Yeah, if I can add on that, I think that the biggest thing at the end of the day, and this goes for all art really, of whether it's music or prose, or a single image like a cover, is it needs to have something to say. If it's just if it's just an image of a dude lighting a cigarette, right? Like that could be, there needs to be mood to that. There needs color and composition and dynamicism, and uh,
And
often,
there needs to be more of a story than just a single image. And I think that
yes,
that's something that's missing as well. A beauty shot can't just be pretty for pretty's sake. You have to be telling a story as well. And so to me, you have that aspect ratio of a comic or a hardcover or a treasury edition, but that is already a limitation. And that's, to me, one of the beauties of comics is we want to try to work with those parameters and then actually defy our expectations of what we can express on this flat surface, whatever that means. Diana, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to add that, while we've all been talking about the cover art here, I think, and I think you might have touched on this a little, but I think what's equally important, and not enough credit is ever given for this, is the design work that is more often than not done by someone in-house who may or may not get any credit for their work. But a great designer can take a humdrum, say, piece of art and make it shine. And sometimes, for whatever reason, you don't have time to get 3 sketches. You don't have time to go back to the drawing board. Comics is a periodical medium. We're constantly working to hit those monthly deadlines. And if your cover is good enough, that's, you don't want that to be your monthly standard. Like, okay, I'll settle for good enough. You never want that. But if you're in a corner, the next step is the design, and your designer can completely save that cover. Interesting designs. I mean, I think of some that I grew up with the Hulk breaking through the logo, and the kinds of things that many companies don't even, they sort of fall apart when you can't mess with the logo. You have to, no. The whole point is, when you're inside a comics store and you are looking at a wall of comics, they all blend together. You want your cover to be the one that shines out among all the rest of them. And sometimes it is the design work itself that does that.
If I can just add, you want the cover has to captivate or you're done. And to your point, Diana, I think that's why it's so critical for comic book editors to have a strong visual acuity. And if you do not, that's okay. Like, we're Jill of all trades, but you know what? You can't master everything. So take a graphic design course. So get a couple of books. I mean, there are thousands, and I have one right here. I'm constantly buying books on thrift. I'm constantly buying books on thrift books, $4 books, and design is one of my things. Okay, so I've got too many design books, but for $4, this is a great basic book. Buy the book, read the book. I think there are a lot of people who want to make comics that like to talk about making comics, but that don't actually sit down and write or draw. Or if they want to be an editor, take a class. You need to
read the book.
Yes, the comic book lettering, Essential Guide to Comic Book Lettering. That's my favorite purchase of last year. And I taught myself how to letter comics a few years ago. And Nate's book is brilliant. It's the best $17 you'll ever spend, even if you don't want to letter comics. It's educational. But I always tell people, Filth and Grammar was called Filth and Grammar because you need to get your hands dirty when you make comics with a red pen or otherwise. So I do think that it's important, really, to be dedicated to the craft, to learn about everyone's job responsibility. And a great designer can save a mediocre cover for sure. And a great editor can art direct the design department if they're not as good as perhaps the ones you've worked with, Di. I find that that's been one thing that I hope is clear with the books that I work on. It does help to be married to a really talented artist who also is probably my favorite graphic designer since Jamie Reed. So, and Peter Saville. So there's that.
So I will tell you, it's funny because I ran across something since you brought up Philip. I ran across something as I was doing my work for you, and something on the off register page about how you saw his work in a backup in a backup of Shade or it was a fill-in of Shade.
Yeah.
Richard and I were talking about that issue last week when we were together, about how he was so excited to see Philip doing that issue.
So. Oh, for sure. I mean, it was a no-brainer. I'd been on the job at DC Comics for 3 months. I was an assistant editor on Shade the Changing Man. My little tiny mind just exploded to millions of pieces just from watching Chris Pacello's evolution as a reader on Shade. And then I'm sitting in this chair and someone hands me the fill-in issue by Shelly Bond and Glenn Dillon, who were these super cool, hip British artists who like hobnobbed with like Britpop musicians. I'm like, whoa. And the art itself just instantly just took my breath away. And I knew like they were onto something. I had wanted them to draw every comic I was affiliated with. But sadly, they were not interested in drawing monthly books. They were interested in drawing until the next paycheck. Sadly. So they would get enough money to get a beer, and then they were at the pub for days. So that's the true story. I'm sticking to that story, but if you want to have Philip on to defend his choice, that's good. That's cool. I'll tune in a different location though, not my house.
We have a question. The name of the book is Design Basics Index. Is that right?
Yes, it's by Jim Krause, Krause, and he's done quite a few books. I can recommend a ton of other graphic design books. I love Chip Kidd's book.
Yeah.
Go, a guide, I think it's a kid's
it is.
guide to graphic design. I bought it for my son when he was a kid, and I don't even think I've allowed him to read it because it's just stayed in my library, which is okay because he'd rather be drumming anyway.
I want to turn a little bit to, like, I want to say, first of all, before I forget, thank you again, all of you, for being this. This has been fantastic. I can tell from the comments that we're seeing in the chat that everybody seems to really be enjoying it. And thank you for sharing all of your experience. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, besides the fact that you guys are editors and we're here, it is Women's History Month. What do you find, or what would you say? I think what I want to ask is, what would you say to young women who want to get into this industry? What would be your advice? Paying attention to the fact that they are women.
Get out there and make comics and take shit from no one. I mean, that's that's my, in a nutshell. The greatest piece of advice I think I ever got, and I have no idea where I read this or who said this, but was never take criticism from someone you wouldn't go to for advice. And that's been a piece that has carried me a long way in my life and in my career. especially in creative industries, I think there are always people who are going to be naysayers, are going to be jealous, are going to say you don't deserve it, are going to, whatever it may be, right? And I think it's really important to remember that we do these things because we're passionate about it, and that needs to drive us more than anything else, more than anyone else out there. So yeah, take no shit is probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
How about you, ladies? And Diana, you teach, right?
Well, can we mention this too? I've actually just I've been teaching comics courses for the last 20 years, and last spring I taught a comics editing course at Portland State University, which Shelly is about to take over in a couple weeks, in fact.
I had heard a little birdie say something like that, but I wanted you guys to tell you.
Yeah, and I mean it's fantastic because Portland has become kind of a comics mecca. So Dark Horse is here, and Image is now here. Oni Press is here, and we have been teaching. There's a program at Portland State, comic studies program, and we have internship programs. Our students are, every term they go in to Dark Horse and then pass to Oni. COVID kind of messed with that a little bit, but not much really. And for example, almost all the assistant editors now at Dark Horse Comics are my former students. So, they're getting trained in history taught by Douglas Wolfe. They're learning about comic book writing taught by Brian Bendis and David Walker. I mean, this is an incredible program that Susan Kirtley has put together. And now Shelly will get in there and teach the next year's worth, and I hope the next several years worth of new comics editors. But where I was going with that, I've completely lost track. So
what do you tell your students? What do you as young women coming into deciding to think about being in this industry? What is the advice
to young women? For me, I'm going to say it's the money. Show me the money. Make sure that you see the money. I think that's really important. We live in a culture that measures worth financially, and you can disagree with that all you want. The fact remains that this is the culture we're in, and far too often women are devalued, both culturally and as a result financially. I spent my career not making as much money as my fellow male editors. And I think I can't speak to younger women, but certainly women of my generation were not brought up to be confrontational in any way. Happy compromises really resonates with me. Very often it would take me a long time to speak up, to ask for more money, even while I was struggling from month to month. And I'll never forget at Kimiko, my ex-husband and I went in finally to ask for a raise, and we each wanted the same amount of money. And Dennis Lasorda, who was not involved in the day-to-day, but who was the money man behind Kimiko, looked at me and said, "Why should you make as much money as he does?" I made the trains run on time. I don't know. Why not? But
That's the right answer.
Those are the kinds of attitudes that certainly I dealt with. Comics, thank God, have changed in all those years. There are so many more women working in the industry now than when I started. But Squirrel wants to say hello. Yeah, the money is really important. Make sure you get paid properly, and if you're not, go in there and ask for it. Don't be afraid to ask for what you're worth.
That's great advice.
And yeah, to follow up on that, if you're at a company that will not give you what you're worth, they are not the company for you. I can say for myself and why I love where I'm at today is just for instance, a year ago on International Women's Day of all days, I found out a male colleague was getting hired in, less experience, same title, for 10 grand more than what I was currently being paid. And, you know, we have all had these discussions with our superiors asking for raises, and it's a terrifying conversation. No matter what level you are at, it's never a comfortable conversation for anyone in the room. I brought it to my bosses, and the first words out of their mouth were, when I asked, you know, to have equal pay, was simply, "You're right. I'm sorry. You should not be bringing this to us. We should be bringing that to you." And to have a comics publisher, you know, respond, you know, a male superior to a female subordinate, like blown away to this day. And that was a moment for me where, like, wow, you have my loyalty forever. The fact that it wasn't an argument, it wasn't a debate, it was we're going to get this resolved. So there, you know your worth, and there are people out there who will support your worth 100%.
On the flip side, because that's a rare exception, and
100%. Yes.
Bravo to you, Heather, for finding out the fact that somebody was being hired with less experience than you at 10 grand above your salary at that time. Bravo. Because sometimes you don't know, people's salaries are usually very hush hush. But what I will say in response to that is, if you're in a situation where you're told tough, or you're told no, or maybe you should work a little harder because you didn't do as much as so-and-so, do not be afraid to walk. Because one thing about the comics industry that I found, and I spent 22 and a half years at DC Comics, and I spent 2.5 years at Kimiko, and I've worked now solo with my husband, self-publishing, for 4 years, and I worked for IDW for about 3. It doesn't matter. If you want to make comics, make comics. You can do it yourself. It will cost you, so you have to be willing to make some compromises. You might need a day job. You might need to dig into your savings. But you know what? You have to stay true to your own core and have agency. And don't let people get you down, because comics right now is in a dumpster fire for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of small companies cropping up. And while that sounds great when you're an indie cartoonist or an indie writer or an indie editor, it sounds good in theory. Sometimes the reasons for people starting companies are not what you think. They're not because people like us want to collaborate and tell stories on what we think is the purest, most authentic, exhilarating medium on earth. Some of these people just want to make movies. And so they look at comics at cheap IP, storyboarding on paper. Okay, so all I have to say to people going into the industry right now is do your research and do the math and look into these places. Take the interview, but don't give them too much of your time, because your time is money. And it's just as difficult breaking in as it is staying relevant for someone in my age category or anyone at any stage of the game. But just know that if you want to make comics, right now is the golden age of crowdfunding. And it really is possible to start making your own comics. And maybe your parents and your boyfriend and your girlfriend are going to help you out by backing your campaign. Good. Let them. It's like my dad helping me with my rent, back in 1988 when Diana gave me my first job. You need help, and then eventually you're going to be able to pay it back and then pay it forward. And that's really why I like teaching comics right now. I am not the great public speaker. I do my best. I push myself off the diving board. That's when exciting things happen. Like I always say, like when I discovered Joe Strummer as a frontman for The Clash, there was an urgency to his message just about art and about living life. And if I would have been able to see him live at a show, I would have jumped on stage and grabbed his rhythm guitar, even though I cannot play, although I've tried 3 times.
Three times.
I tried 3 different times. And I got everything. It's not for me, but my son has got the music chops. But I just want people to know this is a really great art form. As an industry, it's hit and miss, and it goes through ebbs and flows and ups and downs, and it's had its bad times through every decade and every generation. We can make it better if we all believe in things like parity, and we believe in equal opportunity, and we continue to put diverse creators and diverse themes and subject matter in our books, and we don't exclude people, and we welcome the variety in comics.
I think that's a great message. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here, and I appreciate you guys for participating in it. I think we're going to wrap up. I thank you so much. Is there something else that you guys wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about yet? Because I want this to be an open forum for you.
I'd like Diana to mention a little bit about her translation work, because that's another part of the comic book career path that a lot of people don't even know is out there. And Diana just translated, she's been doing the Black Sad series. So I would love for her to tell the audience a little bit about that.
Well, it's funny, Shelly, because I think when you think of the totem pole, the comic book totem pole, editors are pretty much at the bottom of that. But turns out that beneath that are the translators. People know very little about what we do. The fact is that when you, and I'm speaking purely about translating fiction here, when you translate a graphic novel from French to English or Spanish to English, you are essentially writing an entirely new novel in a different language. A translation is a writing job. Knowing what the original story means is the easy part of the job if you have studied a second language. But conveying that meaning in the target language, in my case, English, amounts to writing, and writing is hard, period. But again, most people think that translation is automatic. That Google Translate, I am aware of publishers who have told their editors just to run a book through Google Translate and finesse it a little. And Google Translate searches the internet for the most popular translation of a given phrase. The most popular does not mean it's right, does not mean it's good, does not mean it's poetic.
I have a story on this when you're finished. Literally that.
Well, and that's, I mean, we're in school, we're taught foreign languages with lists of words and corresponding foreign language words. And so we come out of school thinking that there is a one-to-one correspondence between any two languages, and that's just not true. English, for example, the functional working vocabulary of the English language is about 500,000 words, compared to the French language, which is only about 100,000 words. So English has 5 times as many working vocabulary terms as French, which immediately opens up choice in writing as a translator. That said, it's very much like editing, because you are living and breathing a story, and attention to detail is critical for the job. So thanks for asking, Shelly. Heather, you wanted to add to that?
Go ahead. And I got something after you, Heather.
Just to add some color, just to prove the point of how much of an art form translation and interpretation is. When I was at Marvel, I worked on one of the characters that I worked primarily on was Deadpool. And we learned that, I think it was in Mexico, the translation for Deadpool and what they call him down there is massacre, which we thought was fun and cool. And Jerry Duggan, the writer of the Deadpool, like really liked that and really wanted to create a character named Massacre in honor of this. And so essentially it was real quick, it was like a Deadpool fanatic copycat vigilante from Mexico. But we wanted to tell his origin story. And so we had heard that the Marvel translations were terrible of the Deadpool comics. We've heard it might as well be Google Translate. And so in honor of just the fan base down in Mexico, we hired a Mexican writer to write that issue and to write his origin and to actually have it in authentic Spanish. And then to mess with the American readers, when we released the English version, we literally ran the Spanish version through Google Translate to give American readers the taste of what everyone else across the globe has to experience if they want to read a Marvel comic in their native language. And I have never laughed so hard at a Deadpool comic than the one that Google Translate wrote. If you want to check it out and find it for yourself, it's Deadpool 3.1. I think it came out in 2017, around that time. But for instance, my title as assistant editor on that issue was translated to editor deputy, which I loved that title. So,
Nice.
That is a good. That's a great title.
I would take that with you.
I know.
An assistant editor to get that, man, that would be I would put that on my T-shirt if I were you.
Right.
In fact, I might have to make you a T-shirt.
Editor deputy.
Oh yeah. But yeah, so props to you, Diana, and what you do, because truly it is writing and is interpreting the meaning of, and gosh, I can't imagine the work and thought that has to go into something like that.
And how fantastic for that to be a career option.
For sure.
Sure.
Well, it's I will say that most working, I'm pretty much retired at this point, and so I'm lucky to be able to take the time that I want. Most working translators, again, and this goes back to what you're worth in our society, in our culture. Most working translators have to translate hundreds of pages every month, hundreds of comics pages every month in order to be able to pay the rent. because again, it's a job that, like editing, it traditionally has been devalued. So
We must change this.
we hope to change that. Yeah,
we must fight against it, Bob. It's up to you to bring us to the next level, to get some people around where we can all crack skulls and change the game here.
It is, like I said, it's important. And Shelly and I have had this actually conversation, so I'm going to bring it up to you again. But there, especially today, the way the comic industry is and the globalization of it in the American medium, there's more and more coming from other parts of the world. There are creators coming from other parts of the world, and translation is important. There is a book that I read that came out within the last couple of years, and I'm not going to say the name. And it's a book I wanted to love. I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted to really get it, and it is absolutely drop dead gorgeously beautiful. But I couldn't read it because the lettering annoyed me. And I could tell that it was translated. It was from a language that I have experience with. And so I could see how how it was said in the other language and how it came into English, not English. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it was a direct translation. So I could tell what they originally said in the native language, and it didn't match here. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's important to be able to tell that and to pass it along. And without a good translation, if with a better translation and with somebody who didn't mess with fonts, I would have been able to read that book.
I think you've just pointed to what's important about comics, what's valuable about the kinds of comics we've edited, and that is that it really is a team effort, and everyone on that team needs to work at 110% more, 200%. Bad lettering will kill a comic, bad translation will kill a comic, and all these different aspects, scripting, penciling, inking, lettering, coloring, all of these things are held together at one focal point, and that is
Right.
the editor of the book. And so if you are looking at something where the lettering is bad, Bob, or the translation is bad, your editor really has to answer for that.
That's why you have to be fierce. You have to be discerning, because everybody's working in tandem, and you are
a cheerleader.
Yeah, and a cheerleader. That's true. You are master control, but you do have to understand. You have to be able to manage everybody and bring out the best in everybody at all times, because the best comics, in my opinion at least, are constantly moving forward. You hear stories about comics that were never finished, and I know Big Numbers is the one everyone goes back to, and I've got my original issues, so I get it. But when comics break down, it's usually because of communication. It's usually because there's a communication flaw, and that's where the editor really needs to pick up the pieces and either fire and rehire if they can. Often it's a creator-owned book, so sometimes it's best just to let put the project off to the side, let it be dormant for a while until the team can get itself back together, so to speak. But it's usually when an editor can come in and rally the troops.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and we're gonna wrap up now for real, because Diana has a dinner appointment, and I don't want her to be late.
I'm taking Lynn Varley out for her birthday dinner.
Nice.
Lynn has been, not very present in the comics world for about the last 20 some years, but she lives here. She's a good friend, and we have a birthday to celebrate.
So
very nice.
Thank you, ladies, for being here. I absolutely cannot tell you how thankful I am for it. We are going to be doing 2 more of these Women in History, Women in Comics panels. which is news, slight news. There's one already been published on the schedule. Next Wednesday, we're moving to next Wednesday is going to be the Changing Girl reunion with Cecil, Marley, Kelly, and Becky. And
I remember that team well because I put that team together and edited
we have
those
to
first
talk
two.
later.
I might have to send in some trick questions.
You might have to. We'll get a special guest later.
I might have to.
So the other thing that I wanted to announce to everyone is on the 28th, at the same time that we normally do this on Tuesday night, I'm going to have a special final Women in History, Women in Comics panel with Trina Robbins and Mindy Newell, the first women to both write and draw Wonder Woman officially. But they've done millions of other things in comics, and we're going to talk about some comics with some legends there too as well. So that there'll be announcements coming out on that one soon. And I thank everybody for joining us. I thank everybody for tuning in and answering and putting your questions up there and comments. And thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thank you, Bob. This has been great.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Bye.